The conference room went absolutely dead silent when Preston Hughes told me I lacked a fundamental understanding of enterprise-level architecture. This was my architecture. I had built it from scratch 25 years ago. But there he sat, fresh Ivy League diploma in hand, his suit probably costing more than my monthly mortgage, earning exactly twice my salary to mansplain my own security protocols and regulatory compliance frameworks back to me. Human resources told me I needed to accept my status in the corporate hierarchy. At 10 minutes past 10 on a Tuesday morning, I submitted one single email. By 11 o'clock, their entire financial infrastructure was undergoing a catastrophic meltdown. I am Daniel Vance, and for a quarter of a century, I served as the Senior Systems Administrator at Vanguard Financial Partners. It was not the flashy title that ambitious professionals dream about, but I was the man who kept $50 million in daily transactions from disappearing into the digital void. I was the person who thwarted offshore ransomware attacks at 3 in the morning while the executive board slept soundly. I was the individual who meticulously documented our Sarbanes-Oxley compliance so the chief executive officer could boast about our flawless uptime without having the slightest clue what those compliance standards actually involved. It all started precisely 6 weeks before everything came crashing down. I was in the middle of executing diagnostic routines on the internal email servers when my immediate supervisor, Sarah Jenkins, materialized at my office door. She wore that specific expression managers adopt when they are about to ruin your life but intend to frame it as a visionary corporate restructuring. "Do you have a moment, Daniel?" she asked, already shutting the heavy wooden door behind the to invoke executive privilege. Sarah had been with Vanguard for 8 years, overseeing the information technology department with what I generously considered enthusiastic incompetence. She was a pleasant enough individual, though she could not distinguish a network router from a breakroom toaster. However, she possessed a Master of Business Administration, which in the eyes of Vanguard's corporate board apparently superseded any practical knowledge of how computer networks actually functioned. "They are bringing someone in above me," she announced, the eyes carefully avoiding mine as she studied the carpet. "A new director of technology infrastructure." I methodically saved my configuration files, fully aware that whenever corporations introduce unnecessary management layers to an already functional department, disaster is inevitably the byproduct. "What exactly is deficient about our current operational structure?" I inquired, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "We pass every internal audit, and our infrastructure exceeds all federal regulatory requirements." "Nothing is deficient," she countered quickly. "It is about expansion, growth. You know how the Executive Steering Committee loves optimization, optimization. That term had been floating through the hallways of Vanguard like a lingering toxin for months. It usually signified that an executive in a corner office had attended a weekend seminar and discovered a new lexicon of meaningless corporate jargon. "Who is the candidate?" I asked. "Preston Hughes. His credentials are extraordinarily impressive. Harvard Business School, extensive consultation experience with several Seymour technology firms." She recited the information as though she were reading directly from a carefully vetted press release. "Technology firms doing what exactly?" I pressed. "What is his actual technical background in systems administration?" Sarah shifted the weight uncomfortably. "He operates more at the strategic level. Big picture thinking, Daniel. You will still handle the day-to-day technical implementation, obviously. Translation: he would interject opinions regarding highly technical matters he completely failed to comprehend, and I would be tasked with the actual labor while he claimed the corresponding executive bonuses. It was a tale as old as corporate hierarchies." "What is his salary band?" I asked. "That is not really appropriate for discussion," Sarah deflected, suddenly finding the wall calendar fascinating. "Sarah, what is his salary band?" She let out a slow exhale. "He will be classified as senior executive leadership." Senior executive leadership at Vanguard equated to a minimum baseline of $240,000 annually. I was currently earning $118,000 after 25 years of service, 3 complete infrastructure overhauls, and personally shielding the firm from a devastating crypto mining infiltration the previous year that would have resulted in millions of dollars in federal non-compliance fines. But naturally, a young man with an expensive degree and a talent for big picture thinking inherently deserved double my compensation. I chose not to argue the point. It was not worth the friction yet. Perhaps he would actually possess some specialized knowledge. Perhaps Ivy League institutions had recently begun teaching practical technology skills, instead of merely charging $150,000 for elite networking opportunities. I considered myself an optimist, or at least, I used to be. Preston Hughes officially commenced his tenure on a Monday. He arrived wearing an immaculate tailored suit, carrying a handcrafted leather portfolio that appeared entirely untouched by actual paperwork, and sporting a confident smile that heavily implied he had never faced a problem that his family's wealth could not seamlessly resolve. The morning departmental alignment meeting served as my initial confirmation that my previous optimism had been a grave miscalculation. I am incredibly excited to leverage our collaborative synergies across Vanguard's technology ecosystem, Preston proclaimed to the room, gesturing as though he were unveiling the elusive formula for cold fusion. My overarching vision revolves around establishing robust, scalable frameworks that seamlessly align with our core strategic initiatives and quarterly objectives. He spoke for 12 uninterrupted minutes. 12 minutes of elaborately constructed sentences that sounded profoundly important, but contained absolutely zero actionable substance. I observed our junior systems analyst, Julian, frantically typing notes on his laptop, treating Preston's words like ancient wisdom rather than a randomized collection of corporate buzzwords. Following the team meeting, Preston scheduled individual one-on-one assessments with the entire technical staff. My session was slated for 2 in the afternoon. His office was located on the executive floor, which immediately struck me as a red flag. Effective information technology leadership requires proximity to the team, the server rooms, and the actual implementation of the work. Secluding oneself on the executive floor indicated he viewed himself strictly as management, viewing technology as an abstract concept. "Daniel, it is genuinely fantastic to finally connect," he declared, gesturing expansively toward a leather chair positioned across from his massive mahogany desk. Everything about the office was designed to project dominance. The imposing furniture, the framed degrees prominently displayed on the wall, the pristine books on organizational leadership that had clearly never been opened. "Walk me through your current daily responsibilities," he instructed, retrieving an actual physical notepad, behaving as though he were conducting a preliminary audit of my role. A role I had been executing flawlessly since before he was legally permitted to drive a vehicle. I provided him with a comprehensive overview, server maintenance routines, security protocols, user access management across multiple domains, database optimization, redundant backup systems, disaster recovery procedures, network monitoring, patch management, and the exhaustive compliance documentation required by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The invisible, highly specialized labor that kept the entire financial institution legally operational. He nodded rhythmically, his expensive pen gliding across the paper. "Fascinating. And how precisely do you prioritize these various work streams?" "Based on what is genuinely critical to the firm's survival," I replied plainly. "Security threats and compliance risks demand immediate attention. System stability is a constant baseline. Everything else is scheduled around those non-negotiable priorities." "Interesting," he mused, tapping his pen. "In my previous experience with enterprise-level operations, we typically utilize a much more structured, standardized framework. Kanban boards, agile sprints, that kind of highly systematic approach. I had been utilizing ticketing systems and priority queues long before agile methodology became the mandatory religion of corporate management. But instinct told me that explaining the intricacies of our highly customized triage systems would be a futile endeavor. Our current system operates with maximum efficiency," I stated instead. "I am certain it has been adequate up to this point," Preston replied, utilizing a tone that masterfully disguised the word adequate as an insult. "But there is always room for significant optimization. That is precisely why the board brought me in, to elevate our operations to true enterprise standards. True enterprise standards. We were currently managing the technological infrastructure for a financial services powerhouse handling billions in client assets. If we were not already exceeding enterprise standards, our clients and federal regulators would have dismantled the firm years ago. But Preston was only just getting started. Over the subsequent 3 weeks, Preston scheduled an unending barrage of meetings. There were meetings designated to discuss the scheduling of future meetings. There were strategic planning sessions where we spent hours debating how to optimize our optimization strategies. He generated complex frameworks, alignment matrices, and multi-tiered stakeholder engagement documents. He even imported a former colleague from his Harvard network to conduct a comprehensive technology audit. That consultant billed the company $40,000 only to produce a report detailing the exact structural recommendations I had been submitting to the board for free for the past 3 years. And throughout this parade of corporate theater, the actual grueling work still fell squarely on my shoulders. When the primary database cluster began exhibiting severe latency issues, threatening our compliance with federally mandated transaction processing speeds, I was the one diagnosing the corrupted tables and repairing them at midnight. When the virtual private network connections became unstable for our remote compliance officers, I manually rebuilt the routing configurations to ensure encrypted data remained secure. When the accounting division lost access to their quarterly audit reports, I spent hours crawling through misconfigured permission errors that Preston's new protocols had inadvertently caused. Preston's singular contribution during these crises was to stroll into my office, ask if I had identified the root cause paradigm, and suggest we circle back the following day for a deeper dive. The definitive breaking point occurred 5 weeks into his tenure. Our legacy codebase, the highly customized financial transaction processing system I had personally maintained and rigorously modernized over 2 decades, required a critical security update. It was a standard procedure, but it demanded meticulous staging because this specific system processed every single dollar that flowed through Vanguard. A failure here meant an immediate violation of our strict regulatory agreements. I drafted a comprehensive implementation plan, thoroughly stress-tested it within our isolated development environment, and scheduled the final update for late Saturday night when global transaction volume reached its absolute lowest point. Everything was executed strictly by the book. On Friday afternoon, Preston summoned me into his executive suite. Regarding this weekend's proposed security update, he began, leaning back in his expensive chair like royalty holding court. I have reviewed your methodology, and I have some significant strategic concerns. I had forwarded him the 80-page technical documentation 3 days prior, and I was willing to bet an entire month's salary he had not read a single paragraph. What specific concerns? I asked. The methodology feels purely reactive rather than strategically proactive. We should be examining this systematically, not merely applying patches every time a vulnerability is identified. Preston, this is a critical security update. The vulnerability was publicly published 2 weeks ago. In terms of cybersecurity compliance, we are already falling behind acceptable standards. I understand that, Daniel. But what is the overarching strategic framework here? How does this patch align with our broader technology roadmap for the fiscal year? I silently counted to 5. The strategic framework is preventing our financial transaction system from being maliciously exploited by offshore hackers. The alignment is ensuring Vanguard does not end up on the front page of the financial news for a massive data breach. Preston's jaw clenched. He strongly disliked being contradicted, especially when the contradiction was anchored in undeniable technical reality. I believe you are missing the bigger picture here. This is precisely the kind of tunnel vision that holds legacy organizations back. You are so intensely focused on the technical weeds that you are completely blind to the strategic forest. The technical weeds, the precise, uncompromising weeds that guaranteed his exorbitant paycheck, did not bounce. What alternative action would you suggest? I inquired, keeping my voice dangerously level. A comprehensive stakeholder review. We need to assemble the department heads, assess the full cross-functional impact scope, and develop a phased implementation strategy governed by proper executive oversight. That process will likely take several weeks. This particular vulnerability is being actively exploited in the wild at this very moment. Delaying the patch is a direct violation of our internal security compliance policies. Then we will implement additional monitoring safeguards in the interim, he stated dismissively. He had absolutely no comprehension of what he was saying. Enhanced monitoring does not stop a cyber attack. It merely provides you with a highly detailed log of your systems being compromised. But he was the director of technology infrastructure. I was merely the senior systems administrator. I applied the critical update on Saturday night regardless. I did not notify him. I did not request his authorization. I simply executed my job to protect the firm. By Sunday morning, our transaction processing infrastructure was fully secured and absolutely nothing had broken. A shocking outcome, considering I had only been managing these exact systems for 25 years. On Monday morning, Preston discovered what I had done. He did not find out because a system failed, but because I had meticulously documented the entire update in the official changelog, exactly as compliance regulations dictated. He summoned me to his office at 9 o'clock sharp. Sarad Jenkins was already seated inside. It is never a positive indicator when your immediate supervisor is present. However, the situation was far more severe. Brenda Thorne from Human Resources was seated in the corner, clutching a thick manila folder. It was the serious folder, the one containing formal corporate letterhead and official disciplinary documentation. The situation was escalating into official territory. We need to have a serious discussion regarding your completely unauthorized actions this past weekend. Preston initiated, utilizing his deeply disappointed executive voice, as though I were an unruly child who had flagrantly ignored a curfew. The critical security update? I countered calmly. That was fully authorized under our standard operating procedures. I forwarded you the complete implementation plan last Tuesday, which I explicitly directed you to halt pending further executive review. He fired back. You suggested an alternative, highly risky approach. I formally documented why your proposed delay would leave our financial systems critically vulnerable to active exploits and proceeded with the mandatory security update to maintain compliance. Every action is meticulously recorded in the changelog and the email trail. Preston's expression hardened into a mask of pure corporate aggression. The issue at hand is not the technical outcome. The core issue is your flagrant failure to respect the proper chain of command and your blatant disregard for executive leadership decisions. The proper chain of command does not logically override immediate security protocols when a critical, actively exploited vulnerability threatens $50 million in daily transactions. This is exactly the problem with you, Daniel, he interrupted sharply. You do not possess the authority to determine what is critical at the strategic level. That is not your role. You are a systems administrator, not a director. You need to accept your status and operate strictly within it. Accept my status. 25 years of serving as the solitary barrier standing between Vanguard Financial Partners and total digital annihilation. 25 years of missing family dinners for emergency outages, executing weekend system rebuilds, and identifying catastrophic anomalies before the executives even knew they existed. 25 years of retaining the undocumented institutional knowledge that kept the entire corporation solvent. Accept my status. Brenda Thorne from Human Resources leaned forward, radiating practiced corporate sympathy. Daniel, I understand that you may be feeling undervalued regarding your contributions. However, I think what Preston is trying to express is that organizational structure exists for a very specific reason. When we secure leadership with Preston's caliber of credentials and extensive experience, it is vital to trust their strategic guidance. What credentials? The words escaped my mouth before my professional filter could intercept them. What enterprise systems has he actually administered? What financial infrastructure has he personally built? Preston's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. I possess a Master of Business Administration from Harvard Business School and 8 years of high-level technology consulting experience with Fortune 500 companies. Consulting about what exactly? I challenged. Drafting presentations about corporate synergy? Have you ever actually intercepted a distributed denial of service attack in real time? Have you ever recovered an entire corporate network from a ransomware infection? Have you ever rebuilt a corrupted financial database at 4 in the morning? Because if you fail to do those things here, the payroll system fails, and 300 employees do not receive their paychecks. This is precisely the kind of insubordination Preston began, but I cut him off. I am not being insubordinate. I am asking a direct question. What actual, verifiable technical qualifications justify compensating you twice my salary to overrule my critical security decisions using business school buzzwords? The executive office plunged into a deafening silence. Brenda cleared the throat uncomfortably. Daniel, while I hear your frustration, this level of disrespect towards senior leadership is simply unacceptable. Preston's compensation package accurately reflects his role at the strategic executive level, while I am merely the technical labor who executes the actual work. I summarized bitterly. That is a highly reductive way to view the situation, Brenda stated smoothly. Different roles occupy different compensation bands based on the scope of responsibility, educational background, and current market positioning. He holds an Ivy League degree. And I have 25 years of keeping this company's technology alive, I retorted. I suppose we will see which one matters more to Vanguard's executive board when the servers go down. Preston stood up, executing a textbook power move designed to physically loom over me. I believe we are finished here, Daniel. Consider this a formal documented warning. Any future instances of insubordination or failure to execute executive directives will result in immediate escalated disciplinary action, up to and including termination of employment. Brenda will ensure this conversation is permanently added to your personnel file. The final blow arrived 3 weeks later. Preston announced yet another structural reorganization. My position was being officially downgraded to a junior maintenance role, accompanied by a $35,000 reduction in salary. He was hiring a new senior technology architect to manage strategic planning. Translation: a demotion, a massive pay cut, and the introduction of a new executive to claim credit for my labor. Human Resources scheduled a mandatory transition meeting. Brenda Thorne deployed the artificial sympathy once again. We recognize this is a substantial transition, Daniel, she said, sliding a thick stack of paperwork across the table. You will be provided 60 days to acclimate to the new role structure, and we will collaborate on the compensation adjustment timeline. What occurs if I decline the new role? I asked. Then Vanguard will process it as a voluntary resignation. You would be eligible for the standard executive severance package, 2 weeks of pay per year of service, so 50 weeks in your case, plus the payout of your accrued vacation time. 50 weeks of severance, nearly an entire year's salary, plus my 3 weeks of unused vacation. I rapidly calculated the figures. With Laura's income and the severance, we could survive comfortably while I launched my consulting firm. I required time to consider this, I stated. Naturally, Brenda agreed. We need your formal decision by Monday. I reviewed the documents with Laura that evening. The severance agreement contained standard corporate clauses, a strict non-disparagement agreement, a waiver of right to sue for wrongful termination, and the mandatory return of all company property. It is a substantial safety net, Laura concluded. The decision is whether you want to accept the payout or remain in a hostile environment. Remaining means accepting a pay cut to work under Preston's incompetent direction, I noted. Then the decision is clear, she smiled. On Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I entered Brenda's office. I will accept the severance package, I declared, and I am making today my final day of employment. Brenda blinked in surprise. Today? We anticipated a standard 2-week transition period. The legal severance agreement does not mandate a notice period, I countered, tapping the document. It clearly states I may separate from employment immediately upon execution of the agreement. While technically accurate, it is considered highly unprofessional, too. I have been flawlessly professional for 25 years. I interrupted. I have sacrificed holidays, weekends, and sleep to keep this institution operational. In return, I have been systematically undermined, disrespected, and demoted in favor of an executive whose singular qualification is an expensive degree. I do not owe Vanguard an additional 2 weeks of my life. Brenda's expression shifted from corporate shock to begrudging respect. I will process the paperwork. Can you give me until the end of the day? Certainly. I will be clearing out my office. By 10 o'clock, my office was stripped bare. I had securely wiped all personal data from my workstation and packed my belongings into 2 cardboard boxes. A quarter of a century of dedication reduced to 2 boxes. Julian stopped by, looking panicked. Is it true you are resigning? It is true, I confirmed. Wait, who is going to manage the infrastructure? Management will figure it out, I replied honestly. Or they will not, and you will find a better position elsewhere. At 10:15, I signed the severance agreement in Brenda's office. I surrendered my laptop, my cryptographic access badge, and my corporate mobile device. Everything that tethered me to Vanguard Financial Partners was severed. We require an exit interview, Brenda stated. The agreement explicitly notes the exit interview is optional. I decline. I walked out of the building at exactly 10:47 on a Tuesday morning. I was 53 years old, officially unemployed, and I felt lighter than I had in decades. I drove to an upscale coffee shop near my home, ordered a premium latte I usually considered too expensive, and sat by the window watching the morning traffic. My mobile phone vibrated in my pocket at exactly 15 minutes past 11. It was Julian. Daniel, I am incredibly sorry to bother you, but something critical is occurring with the primary servers. Everything is running violently slow, and the database cluster is returning timeout errors. I have no idea what is wrong. I calmly sipped my coffee. Did you check the diagnostic monitoring dashboard? I do not possess the authorization to access it. Preston is attempting to log in, but his credentials are failing. He should have access, I noted. He is the Director of Technology Infrastructure. He claims you never provided him with the master administrative passwords. I transferred those credentials to Sarah 6 months ago. She was contractually obligated to add him to the executive administrator group. There was a tense silence on the line. Sarah claims she has no memory of that exchange. Can you please just tell me the master password? I do not work at Vanguard Financial Partners anymore, Julian. Providing you with access credentials to restricted financial systems I no longer possess legal authorization for would constitute a severe federal crime. But this is a massive emergency. Then Preston must utilize his executive authority to contact the corporate security team and follow the mandatory credential recovery protocols. We do not have a corporate security team, Daniel. We had you. Then I suppose that is a strategic oversight Preston should have evaluated prior to restructuring my role out of existence. I could hear genuine panic in the young man's voice. Daniel, please. The entire infrastructure is actively crashing, and I do not know what to do. I am sorry, Julian. I truly am. But this is no longer my jurisdiction. You need to resolve this with your current leadership. I terminated the call. I felt a brief pang of sympathy for Julian. He was a decent kid trapped in an explosive situation created by incompetent management. The phone rang again at 33 minutes past 11. This time it was Sarah Jenkins. Daniel, we have a catastrophic situation here. The entire financial processing system is experiencing major faults, and nobody can access the administrative controls. I need you to walk me through the recovery procedure immediately. I executed my severance agreement over an hour ago, Sarah. I no longer maintain any employment relationship with Vanguard. I cannot legally provide technical support. This is an absolute emergency. You cannot just leave us hanging like this. I did not leave you hanging, I stated firmly. I spent 25 years generating documentation, offering to train subordinates, and ensuring operational continuity. The executive board decided my technical expertise was not worth fair compensation. That is not me leaving you hanging. That is Vanguard experiencing the direct consequences of its own leadership decisions. We will pay you external consultant rates, she pleaded desperately. Whatever you want. I will consider a formal consulting contract. Have Preston email me a finalized proposal outlining the precise scope of work, timeline, and budget. My emergency crisis rate is $400 per hour, with a mandatory 20-hour minimum. $400 an hour? That is exorbitant. I will have to get emergency board approval. Can you at least give me a hint about what is failing? Not without a legally binding contract and an upfront retainer. That is standard consulting procedure. I ended the call. The calls persisted. Julian twice more, Sarah again, and eventually at 15 minutes past 12, Preston Hughes himself called. Daniel, I do not know what kind of leverage you believe you are establishing here, but this is profoundly unprofessional. Our entire infrastructure is non-operational. Then I strongly suggest you repair it. You are the Director of Technology Infrastructure, are you not? You know damn well I do not possess the highly specialized technical background to repair this system. That sounds remarkably like a strategic leadership challenge, Preston. I am certain your Harvard business degree adequately prepared you for crisis management. His voice dropped to a threatening cold register. If the board determines you intentionally sabotaged our systems before your departure. I did not sabotage a single file, I interrupted smoothly. I surrendered all company property, voluntarily revoked my own access credentials, and departed peacefully. If your multi-million-dollar infrastructure cannot function for 2 hours without my presence, that represents a massive dependency management failure on the part of senior leadership. Specifically, your part. We can sue you for financial damages, he shouted. For what exactly? Resigning my position, accepting a legally binding severance package your own human resources department drafted, and refusing to provide uncompensated technical labor after my employment was officially terminated. Good luck with that litigation. I hung up and immediately blocked every known phone number associated with Vanguard Financial Partners. The latte was entirely cold, but I finished it anyway, savoring the bitter reality of their situation. Because here is exactly what was occurring on a technical level. Vanguard's entire corporate infrastructure operated on highly complex, interconnected systems I had personally engineered over 2 decades. The automated maintenance scripts, database optimization, cache clearing, log rotation, temporary file purging, all executed under my specific user credentials for historical security reasons. When my account was officially deactivated by Human Resources upon my departure, those critical maintenance scripts instantly halted. Without that invisible continuous housekeeping, the servers immediately began accumulating fatal errors. Memory banks filled to capacity. Background processes choked. The entire network initiated a rapid, cascading spiral into total systemic failure. It was not a sudden crash, it was a structural collapse. Everything I had kept meticulously balanced was suddenly left entirely unattended. I could have warned them. I could have spent my final 2 weeks transferring knowledge and rewriting the automation protocols. But they had aggressively demoted me, slashed my compensation, and placed me under the authority of a man with zero technical capability. So I took my severance and departed. Now they were discovering the precise financial value of my status. Later that afternoon, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Brenda Thorne from Human Resources, calling from the personal mobile device. Daniel, I recognize you are under no obligation to assist us, but we are facing a genuine disaster. The executive board is asking what it would take to bring you back, even temporarily. Please contact me. I promptly deleted the message. When Laura returned home from work, we ordered our favorite pizza. You are currently trending on the professional networking sites, she informed me, passing the phone across the kitchen island. I looked at the screen. Sarah had posted a desperately worded request, seeking an emergency enterprise infrastructure consultant to resolve a major systems failure. The comments were brutally transparent. This is exactly why corporations should never underpay their technical staff. Sounds like your executive board just received a masterclass in the value of institutional knowledge. One sharp observer had pieced the timeline together. Looks like Daniel Vance departed Vanguard today after 25 years of service. Absolutely terrible timing for your organization. It was no longer my responsibility to manage Vanguard's corporate reputation. That evening at 8 o'clock, my phone rang again. It was Richard Hayes, Vanguard's chief technology officer. The executive who had originally hired Preston. Mr. Vance, I would like to formally discuss a consulting arrangement, Richard stated, his voice tight with suppressed panic. We are prepared to authorize premium rates for your immediate assistance with our catastrophic technical difficulties. 25 years of flawless dedication had not warranted competitive compensation, but 12 hours of total corporate paralysis was suddenly worth premium rates. I will forward you my emergency consulting proposal, I replied calmly. The rate is $400 per hour, 20-hour minimum engagement. 50% of the fee must be wired up front before I initiate any diagnostic procedures. Those terms are exceptionally aggressive, Richard noted. They are standard market rates for emergency crisis resolution on proprietary legacy systems, I countered. You are completely free to locate another independent consultant who possesses intimate knowledge of Vanguard's custom infrastructure. Except, we both know that person does not exist. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line as he calculated the devastating cost of continued downtime against my demands. The rate is acceptable, the chief technology officer finally conceded. Send the contract,